thank you for joining. Is this the last session of the day? Is that right? Is it it's the last session of the last day? Before Common, right, before Common. All right. Well, thank you for joining us on the last session of the last day before Common. My name is John White. I am the State Superintendent of Education in the great state of Louisiana. Good to see many familiar faces and old friends, and so thank you for being here. I'm joined by my colleague, longtime friend, and in this endeavor, co-founder, Paymon Rouhanifard, who previously was the superintendent of Camden, New Jersey's public school system, and today is here as the Chief Executive Officer for an initiative that I'm the board chair of called Propel America. And we wanted just to come and talk with you about Propel America and share a little bit about what we're thinking about and just engage in a conversation. And as I said, it's great to see some old friends. We were on a similar kind of conference about a year ago or so, and we were kind of talking about our work and talking about what we've taken from it as heads of education systems. And our conversation began to kind of coalesce around three things. And I want to just open this discussion by kind of sharing our observations about those things. First, we come out of our experiences running big public school systems with no cynicism, and actually with a deep belief that systems and understanding systems and doing work at scale matters and is incredibly important. We're not cynical about bureaucracy. We believe that government is necessary. We believe there's a better way to do it, but we are encouraged and grateful for the chance to work on issues at scale. Secondly, we found in our communities and obscure places, a small town in New Jersey, a Gulf South state, in places like Shreveport and Camden, we have found the most amazing people, sophisticated people, people who will never work on Wall Street or in Silicon Valley, but who have tremendous skills and tremendous leadership potential in their communities. And third, even as we are more successful in Camden or New Orleans or Baton Rouge or wherever it's been than we were before, we find ourselves deeply dissatisfied with talking about success in the conventional terms that education people talk about success. We graduate more kids, but we are deeply dissatisfied with going out and issuing a press release about more kids graduating from high school when we know the realities of what happens to so many kids the day after they graduate from high school. And so we started talking about our belief in systems, what we've found, the tremendous human and other assets that exist in communities, and at the same time, this extraordinary failure to account for what happens to young people the day after they graduate from high school. And we realized that we had to set about building something, building a system of connectivity to good jobs that doesn't exist in most places, and that certainly doesn't exist across most metropolitan areas, across most states, or across our country. It's that mission to build a scalable system of connectivity to good jobs that we've called Propel America that we're about to embark on. Paymon will tell you a little bit more about our reasoning behind it.
Yeah, so I just want to share a couple animating stories driving our theory of action. And really at the core of why we are doing what we're doing has to do with what we believe to be this false choice that high school students across America, and particularly those from low-income communities, face. And that is to forestall income and pursue education and accrue significant debt, or to forestall education and mobility to go into low-paying, entry-level, non-upwardly mobile work. And so when I share those words with you, I think immediately of Ebion, who is a student of ours, graduating near the top of her class at Big Picture Learning Academy. And she enrolled in Stockton University. And within 6 months, I was at Wegmans shopping one day, which is in Cherry Hill, right outside of Camden, and she was working as a cashier. And I asked her, hey, what's going on, Ebion? Why are you back in Camden today? And she says that her mother had a 7th child and asked her to come back home and help support the family. Now, I think there have been conversations throughout this conference around what higher ed can be doing to better support students like Ebion. And I think that's fundamentally true, and Stockton is not oriented to best support her needs. And I would also argue that she probably still would have left to support her family. And here she is in a very entry-level, non-upwardly mobile job. On the other side, I think about a student named Rakeem, who I actually knew pretty well over at Camden High School. And Rakeem stumbled into, very happenstantially, a medical assistant apprenticeship program that was run out of one of our hospitals. And that hospital came to us. It wasn't anything we initiated. They had an acute hiring need. They said, give us 10 students, because we're desperate to hire in these positions. And that program entailed students like Rakeem taking courses at the local community college and accruing credits toward an associate's degree, but most importantly, gaining a credential toward a quick path to economic stability within a year, right, of high school graduation. He's making $35,000 a year. And I'll fast forward to when I saw him next at graduation day. And so Rakim had a child when he was 16 years old. And I should have mentioned, he had the grades and the attendance to have enrolled in a lower tier four-year college. And he tells me at graduation day, he's bragging about the job that he got, how he's still thinking about completing his degree. And he married the mother of his child. And he begins to tell me about how his daughter was bouncing around different couches in Camden and how she is now enrolled in a daycare. And as we've just been trading notes over the last couple of years now, we just had this kind of, be candid with you, like idiotic aha moment of like, wait a minute. There's one way to address generational poverty. I mean, I think about his daughter and the reality that she was facing before and the exposure to trauma and toxic stress and not being in a secure learning environment, and now she's in a daycare. So I'm going to pass it back over to John to talk a little bit more about the program.
So knowing that Avion experienced a choice that she had to make to accept low-wage work and forestall education, and knowing that on the other hand, Rakim had someone who helped him make a choice to connect with future education and a good job, we have to ask ourselves, how is it true? How is it possible that there is not a system that exists in any community, in any state, red or blue, urban or rural in this country, that does for more kids like Rakim what it did for him? And the truth of it is, of course, that there is a system. You know, if your parents dropped you off on a leafy green campus in the dorm and gave you your meal plan and you had your summer internships, that's a system. That's a system of support to get a good job. Or if you join the military, like a fair number of kids in my state do, that's a system to get a kid a good job. There's nobody who recruits kids, who trains them, who puts them into good first jobs and helps promote them better than the United States Armed Services. But in my state, in New Jersey, and certainly in your state too, most kids are neither on a glide path through a four-year institution, nor do they enlist in the armed services. They are the silent, huge group of kids who actually don't have a viable plan and for whom there is not a system of connectivity to good jobs and ongoing education. Point, period. There is no civilian system that exists at scale to connect low-income or any income youth in this country who are not immediately bound for four-year colleges with a reliably good job and ongoing education. And that's what we've set out to change. We picked up a co-founder along the way, Deborah Kirshan, whom we worked with at the New York City Department of Education, and we began to build that system, just to prototype it in our home environments. We call that prototype Propel America. And Propel America is an attempt to develop a system of connectivity to good jobs and future education for students who have done everything we've asked them to do and graduate from high school at no cost to the student and at no opportunity cost either. We're piloting this system right now in the New Orleans area, in the Baton Rouge area, and in North Louisiana, in the Mississippi Delta, as well as in South New Jersey, and Pennsauken, New Jersey, and Camden, New Jersey, where Paymon worked before. And we're piloting it to try to develop a simple system, a system that can plug into any high school, any community college, and any employer that offers good middle skill entry-level jobs at a reasonable scale in any region of the country. And so right now we're engaged in prototyping it. And here's how it looks, because it's happening right now in those communities today. We recruit kids in the fall semester of their senior year, just like four-year institutions do. We select them based on attendance and based on a desire and a commitment to work. And they spend the spring semester of their senior year, which, if you've raised kids or if you've taught school, you know is the most wasted part of our education system, dead time. The spring semester of their senior year to teach a core skills course, to expose them to not just basic workplace skills, but also to what choices actually exist. What financial resources do I need to plan to have, and what financial resources do I need to plan to get? And to test out those skills in a real-world work environment through externships and days on site. If they want to continue with us, students enter into what we call the specialization period, the week after they graduate from high school, not the fall after, the week after, a 3 to 6 month boot camp type environment provided by a local training organization, most likely a community college. And our kids are going to become pipe fitters. Our kids are going to become electricians. They're going to be nurses assistant, mental health technicians, sterile processing technicians, in the companies that have the most respected brands in our regions. Right now, it's industrial contractors, and it's the largest hospitals in the Mid-Atlantic and in the Gulf South. Soon it will be auto manufacturers and auto repair environments. And we're looking at other industries to expand as well. But our kids will get jobs in the fall in those fields. And they'll be supported by industry veterans and paid teachers who support them along the way through a service that we call navigation, a weekly cohort meeting and a daily check from an industry veteran. And the good news is that we're trying to prove you can do all of this without raising huge systems of scholarships, because in fact there are public subsidies that, though they are clunky and though they are not easy to manipulate, if you know how to use them, they can be put into combination with one another to form the system that I'm describing. Our kids use the K-12 dollars to have a K-12 educational experience. They draw down Pels and they draw down state aid to fund their higher ed experience. They use WIOA dollars to fund the stipends that they need to get equipment and travel. And we even have our kids registering for SNAP so that any funding that we need to raise ourselves, we can reimburse through federal subsidies. We need to find in this country a system that works like that. Not just in the hundreds of kids like we're working on today, but in the thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and millions of kids, so that any young person in America who wants to work, who's done everything we ask them to do and has gotten across the finish line, doesn't go from a highly supportive environment on one day to no support on the next day. And we believe that as clunky as they are, the systems, the players, and the money is there to make it happen.
So this is our first time to ASU GSV, and it didn't take me long to know what the buzzwords here are: disrupt and innovate and reinvent. And I would argue what we're doing is just building upon the strengths of American communities. We want to make the whole greater than the sum of the parts. So we recognize today that, and we experience this, these institutions are siloed. Our K-12 system in Camden didn't interact meaningfully with our local employers, and there was a lot of inertia on their end, and they weren't always reaching into our community. And the training organizations in between, as you all know with community colleges, sometimes they're mimicking four-year colleges and they're not fulfilling their mission to bring these institutions together because there's a lot of inertia and everyone has somewhat misaligned incentives. And so what we're trying to do is to push on those gears and to really create a flywheel effect that allows, again, for the whole to be greater than the sum of the parts. And we're just so excited to be able to think about how to scale what we are doing currently in Camden, Louisiana, because we, again, know these assets are legitimate. And you don't have to do some expensive, new programmatic, flashy thing, and you can do this in a cost-effective way that builds upon the people that you're currently serving. So we're just thrilled to be able to have this conversation with you all, and we're looking forward to taking a few questions.
Let's open it up. Yes, sir.
First of all, this is awesome. Thank you. I was wondering, you talked about how you've gotten really resourceful in terms of how you leverage different existing public systems and dollars to sort of address different needs or different sort of stages or progressions for kids as they move through this. Are you on your end sort of managing that so you're not asking students to sort of negotiate all the complexity of that? Is that part of what the sort of the ad for you is, that you're pulling that in but trying to make it more seamless for them as end users?
Yes, and it shouldn't be that way. I mean, it shouldn't be that there have to be intermediaries that walk students through all of the bizarre incentives that are created by the higher ed funding system at the federal level, the higher ed funding system at the state level, WIOA, SNAP, Perkins, and whatever other dollars you're. But I think we are getting to a sequence where you can make the first order decision, the second order decision, the third order decision, the fourth order, and only by the time you reach the end of that chain do you have to start raising money. And the problem, of course, is that like with childcare and Head Start and pre-K, on the other end of the spectrum, all of these things are fragmented. And you could actually have kids that are seeking SNAP or WIOA funds who are currently enrolled in college, and they don't know that they're actually having enrolled in college, which is of course what we told them to do, is the thing that doesn't make them or makes them ineligible for WIOA and SNAP. So you have to kind of know how the system works, help them do all these ridiculous things like applying for WIOA right after they graduate from high school, but before they actually apply to college. But we think the system can work better, and that's what we're trying to do. We also think, by the way, that that's not something that's confined to Louisiana or New Jersey. That's a structure that works anywhere and can be replicated in any context.
Hi, 2 questions. I wonder if you could speak to what I consider to be 2 of the biggest sort of milestones or issues that we need to grapple with when we talk about this population. One is those kids that don't complete high school. So are you working with those kids that either drop out or are pushed out of the traditional K-12 system? And then the other is, what role, if any, do you see families playing vis-a-vis the structure that you're setting up, or the vision that you have for the structure that you're setting up?
So on the first point, we have not created a program right now that is designed to serve students who drop out of high school. Thankfully, we have record high school graduation rates, and we think that there's clearly a critical mass of students who don't have a clear plan post-high school, but that's not the program we're designing at the moment. The second part of your question, remind me again.
The role that you see
for parents, right? Yeah, so it's really interesting. Right now, we're working with students, as John mentioned, and one thing that's come up is the students are really enthused about the option and just how different it is. And then they have the conversation with their parents, and it comes back to us that there are some concerns. Wait a minute, this isn't the traditional path. And I do think, and this just speaks to change management and the work of trying to inspire connection across our communities, there's a change in mindset that's required. And we have to win over hearts and minds. And frankly, I think the conversation is not entirely difficult because you can lead with the fact that you get paid while you go to school. So we're underwriting tuition through public subsidies. We pay a living wage. We pay a stipend to our students as they're taking their coursework, and they get case management mentorship supports along the way. And certainly, all of our families know of other students and alumni who have suffered through the consequences of dropping out with debt and no additional earning ability, but it does require pulling parents in on the front end.
Hi, my name is Rajan, coming from Baltimore, with an organization called Dent Education, and we work with high school students after school and during summer. Our program is focused around creation and entrepreneurship, but one of the challenges that we face is realizing that while we can catalyze students to really discover their ability to be creators and change the world around them, and they have these mindsets that we think are very valuable in the world, they often graduate high school, yellow brick road ends, college might not be the route, and unfortunately they fall to wage jobs or unemployment and a lot of other things. And so we as an organization now are trying to, first we're looking at who does this really well, and unfortunately we've not found someone who is really doing this well. And obviously a lot of it is localized, what's in the community. But I was wondering if you all had any resources or places. We're basically trying to build up in-house, here are the 500 different pathways for you after high school and what it takes to go in and what you can expect as an outcome. But do you know of any resources that at the moment kind of exist for us or for students to be more prepared for that post-high school journey?
We should just talk after the session. We've been going around the country trying to learn from other organizations like Year Up, like Braven, like Generation out of McKinsey Global Institute, and we'd be happy to share with you what we've learned and put you in touch with some of those people. Off to Common.
What do you see as your pathway to scale? What's your timeline, scale, ambitions, obstacles? Where's this thing going?
Yeah. So the answer is we don't know. I think, Paymon just listed a set of organizations that are, if you've not gotten exposed to their work, just par excellence. I mean, they are world-class. And we actually don't aspire to necessarily run a nonprofit organization that is as just to replicate the successes of those organizations. They have done exceedingly well, and their outcomes are remarkable. Scale is kind of at the heart of what we are thinking about, and adaptability in different circumstances. Communities where the drive may be 45 minutes to the community college, communities where it may be a walk down the street. And so first order of business is, how do we prototype something in a way where we're confident that in different communities it can work, in places that are as different as rural Northeast Louisiana and urban, Philadelphia, outside of Philadelphia. So that's the first order of business. Secondly then, well, what's the system and what are the artifacts from that actually then become adaptable in other places? And we're building it so that we have a curriculum, a high school curriculum, that any teacher in the country can be taught, but it's a teacher in that school who teaches it. We're building parameters around what makes for a good community college boot camp that is fast, that is targeted to the job, that is affordable, and that can be replicated anywhere. We're building a model, both a human being model and an online model, of what makes for good scalable navigation services, and that can be, hopefully, replicated anywhere. So having developed those things, having prototyped those tools, the question is, well then who is going to make it happen at scale? Because the truth of it is, we actually think that any governor in the country could pretty much put the pieces that we're describing into place. Most big city mayors, are in a position in Denver or Chicago, wherever, to make this happen. Large employers may be able fully to do it on their own. Social media platforms may actually be able to pick these tools up and find ways of scaling. What we think there is not the replacement for, however, is communities. We think kids are going to largely live and work within a reasonable distance of the place where they grow up. We think that the institutions in their lives when they were children are going to continue to be influential institutions for many of them in their lives as adults. And we also think there is tremendous, tremendous capacity within those communities for greater alignment than exists today. So the question is, how do you build a scalable apparatus, like a scalable architecture, that is deployable by the institutions and human beings that have a real identity affinity with the young people that we're trying to serve in places as wildly disparate as rural Louisiana and the urban mid-Atlantic, or rural Montana and South Florida? And that, I think, is the trick. We see a lot of good stuff that's scalable. I mean, think about the leaps forward that universities have taken in recent years and the incredible public profile that places like Arizona State or Southern New Hampshire or Purdue have achieved. And then think about these smaller programs and the incredible outcomes that they've achieved. What we don't yet see is where there are examples of communities at scale figuring out how to use that national scalable content to great effect for their kids. We're trying to build a replicable local infrastructure that allows big content to support the kids who need the support the most.
Could you talk a little more about navigation? I'm super interested in the guidance component. How we give good localized and personalized guidance to make good. I'm in CTE. There's such a big distribution from low wage, low demand, high wage, high demand, and that guidance is both. It has to be right for the kid and right for the community. So what systems do we put behind the human beings that walk alongside young people to help them make good decisions?
Yeah. So let me say one thing first, and then I think you should probably answer the question about navigation. I'll just throw in one quick thought. To be fair, Tom, we are making some choices up front about what is a good job and what is not. And we so far are doing our work in industrial environments where there is a credentialing system that gives us confidence that the wage, the schedule, and the benefits are good jobs with opportunities for ongoing education. And hospitals are providing us, and healthcare providers, incredible scale and access to a professional life for our students. We have had conversations with retailers, and we've had conversations with cybersecurity environments. And with a lot of retailers, we're struggling to see the path there that makes it the right direction for our students. And on the other hand, with cybersecurity, we're struggling to see how, for a student who doesn't have a bachelor's degree or an obvious path to it, do you actually create an environment that is cost-effective enough and time efficient enough? So I say that first to say that before we even get to the question of navigation, we are making as informed judgments as we can about limiting our program to what we would define as being a good job, and are trying to do some of effectively the guidance up front through that decision.
So those judgments would have some national implications, but just think about welding. You've done some cool stuff with welding in Louisiana. Welding is highway high demand if you're in the Gulf, but if you're in eastern Kentucky, probably not so much. It'll be about $15 an hour. So how to create hyper-localized guidance that's accurate to the job cluster and the zip code?
Yeah, do you want to?
Yeah, so I'm glad John mentioned that we have made some of those choices already, and the whole idea is high demand, high wage. And so in Louisiana, they're looking at students walking to the course. Really, the navigation begins then because they're choosing healthcare or craft trades. And it took me far too long to realize when I was superintendent that a 17-year-old in Camden had no idea what jobs were in their community. That's really the first time they're actually being asked, well, pick one of these two, or pick door C and go on a more traditional route. And so that 17-year-old, not knowing what jobs are in their community, buildings they drive by all the time, and they certainly don't know what credentials you need for those jobs and where you get those credentials and what is the relative value of each and so on and so forth. So that process begins in the second semester senior year course. Subsequent to that, during, as John mentioned, specialization, they meet in weekly cohorts, roughly 10 to 15 students. And this is where we have learned from some other organizations to create kind of this cohort trust, where there's a facilitator who just checks in with those young people and asks questions around, hey, what can we do to support you? What's going on? And toward the end of preparing them for their job interview. And so post-job placement, there's a mentor that's assigned, and we get volunteers from our employer partners. It's something that we've already built MOUs around, and so there's a one-on-one partnership there.
Hey, can I say one more thing about the economic piece? You're cool if I jump in on that?
Yeah, please.
So, we've looked at our state's data, and our states have created reports that show, in our state it's a 4-star job or a 5-star job, and the job paths that our kids are on are a path to being an RN, which is a 5-star job, and a path to being a level 3 or level 4 welder, or in our case, pipe fitter or electrician, 4 or 5-star job. So in some respects, we're in line with what our state's economic and workforce development agencies have said is a good job. At the same time, I cannot tell you how many people we've encountered along the way who have said, well, if you train people for these jobs, you've got to be prepared for things to be cyclical, and you've got to be prepared to upscale and downscale. Or aren't you just saturating the market with people who are credentialed in an environment where there's already all these credentials, and well, there aren't enough of those jobs in this region, but there are enough of these jobs. And it has been amazing to me how many people are kind of saying that the more you skill up, you're going to pose some sort of risk macroeconomically to the environment in your given market. And then some people will say, well, no, there aren't enough jobs in the first place, and blah, blah, blah. And honestly, I don't know how to test that other than just for us to get out and do it. And I think there's obviously you have to be cautious around projections that employers are making. And so we start every cycle with some sense of what employers are actually doing. But if we listen to every single person who had told us that you're either oversaturating the market or you're overvaluing this job versus that job, we would do nothing, because there is a lot of dogma out there about kind of regional workforce economies. And I guess we feel like rather than just waiting, we need to get in and really see how accurate are the projections that both government and employers are setting out.
I've got a question for you. So first, thanks for your leadership. It's great to see national leaders like yourselves out here on these important issues. You just got to jump in the pool and start to make it happen. So good work. Two questions. One, what do you say to those who are saying you're not starting early enough? This needs to go earlier within their lives so they start to see these pathways earlier on, are prepared to engage post-high school. And then also to those who might say that you're lowering expectations, that taking college off the table, or kind of going right into workforce apprenticeship job placement is really kind of lowering expectations. What's your comeback to all that?
I'm going to take the first, I'll take the second.
Yes, I'm sorry, Miles. I'm so consumed with the second, I've forgotten the first.
And the first part being, what do you say to those who say you're not starting early enough?
Oh, yeah.
This
Look,
needs
I
to
mean,
begin.
fine, agreed. But there are, what are there, 20,000 high schools in the country or somewhere along those lines? I mean, how many of them actually have the Swiss model, built in where kids are actually making super intentional choices when they're 15 that have lasting consequences? I mean, how many? 4? So that being true, and for good reasons and bad, the American high school being very much a kind of not a place that commits kids one way or the other. And that's not going to change anytime soon at great scale. We are trying to find the point in time that finds the greatest leverage in the most number of kids, particularly vulnerable kids, in a position where they have to make a call. And we have been blown away by when you're out with kids 2 weeks before high school graduation, not surprising to any of you who have spent time in high schools, how many of them, some of them don't know, or some of them are just faking knowing. Well, I'm doing this. Well, have you applied? No. And so we are trying to find the point at which there is maximal need to make a decision and maximal number of kids who haven't yet made one. And secondly, in order to scale, you have to have something that is adaptable in any environment. And every high school in the country graduates kids on one day, and those kids have a diploma and have to make a choice the next day. So we would love to see more high schools build down into the school system. As Tom mentioned, I'm grateful for you mentioning it. In Louisiana, we're trying to do that. And a kid who already has their NCCR level 1 or already has their CNA coming to us, hell yeah, we can do a lot more with that kid in terms of getting them a better job than we can if a kid has no preparation at all. But there are still, in every community in this country, going to be legions of kids who have no plan, who have no sense of direction. And that being the case everywhere, this is the thing we think is effective, efficient, and scalable.
So to the second question, it sounds like John may want to add on to this. We talk about this a lot, and I've just been doing a lot of soul searching myself. And when I share that story with you all about Rakeem, that was about 3 years ago now. And I remember I went back to my leadership team. I was like, holy cow, this medical assistant apprenticeship program, like 10 students, we need to multiply this by 20 tomorrow. And to a person, our team pushed back on me. And we had this long debate about the intellectual merits or lack thereof and how what we should want for our own children should apply to other people's children. And I hear that. And I decided not to use my veto card in that moment, but just continue to kind of process and reflect. And there are a lot of different ways I can answer this, but the first would be, as educators, we learn about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And yet the way we think about guidance and kind of the pathways we put forward for young people, we don't apply that. And we take a young person who lacks a social and financial safety net, and we put them in a more vulnerable place. And I'm speaking more about lower tier 2- and 4-year colleges. So the ones who are on their way to higher tier institutions or have like a KIP through college support system, that's one thing. But we're putting them in a more vulnerable place, and you all know the data. Like literally the majority of them drop out with debt. And so it just makes me think about kind of the one-size-fits-all and the unintended consequences. And so for all of us, and I'll make some assumptions in this room, and maybe it doesn't apply to everyone here, but we had the support structures where we could go from a high school diploma to a 4-year college to a career. But you can rethink the order of life operations. And so for Rakeem, it's high school diploma, credential stability, maybe another credential, associate's degree, bachelor's degree. And he's on his way, I can tell you that. And so it's just rethinking the order of life operations.
The other thing I would just say is our kids are going to college. They're not going to universities, but they're going to college. And our kids who are electricians are coming out with 21 credits by the time most kids are just starting school. Our CNA kids are Pell eligible. I mean, those are full-time kids. The one thing different is they're not working in the school cafeteria. They're working in the most respected brands in our state. And I think that what we're trying to do is to differentiate between going to college and going to universities, which is a small subset of the college-going population. Bobby?
What are you thinking about using technology and support for the scale up? So you were putting them in these cohorts with mentors and 15 people, but that's going to restrict your scale up and your oversight on these students. So what are you thinking about the use of technology and partners to do that with?
So we are trying to digitize, socialize everything that we do. Our curriculum is going to be an online open access curriculum. Our student interaction and the whole student experience will be ultimately driven by a phone-based app. However, I mean, I know this is a cliche to say, we're not a tech company. We don't actually view the solution as technology so much as we view it as there's a community-based solution that can be scaled and enhanced by way of technology. And the reason I make a distinction is that a lot of what I described, any one of us actually may use LinkedIn or some other online source to do. We make contacts and build professional networks, like our kids, through social sources. The technology industry, though, still approaches that issue by atomizing individuals and saying, let's give you an individual product that you can use to enhance your navigation capacity. You being an individual who has the skills, the resources, and the connections to do that. Our 18-year-olds don't benefit from LinkedIn or whatever other social service exists for a million reasons, not the least of which is they don't have themselves the professional history, they don't have the social relationships, they don't have all that comes with what used to exist in more stable employer to community relationships, which is, I know someone who works there. My uncle worked there. My aunt worked there. In Louisiana, I'm going to walk down the oil field and work in the oil patch. In the old Midwest or upstate New York, it'd be I'm going to work in a factory. You know, whatever it is, our kids don't have that. And we need to find a way to rebuild that. And social, big online social platforms can help people like us rebuild that in some sense, but we don't believe that they can do that for the kids we're serving. We had one question over here.
The current pilot is small. We have 100 students across the two regions.
Going to 300 next year and 1,000 by 2022, which is the point at which we feel like we will have reached a reasonable stress level to prove that the tools work at scale. See a question back there?
How do you see the students' social emotional learning weighing in or factoring in here? Their ability to, be self-aware, self-regulate as they transition, as they go through this really rough and rocky transition.
Yeah, so that starts with the course they take, second semester, senior year. So a huge component of it is just professional skill development, developing mindsets, and just giving them tools to know how to deal with that transition, a very significant transition. And so we have no illusions that it'll be easy, and it's a course, and you say it, and they go do it. And so that's where navigation comes in. And so the adults who will support our students post-high school after they take this course, they are trained in the same curriculum. And they're literally lesson plans as they meet with cohorts, sitting in community colleges, getting their credentials, and we spiral back to those things. And we can actually apply it now to real life because they're doing externships, right? So a big part of the training is they're getting exposure, clinical rounds as a certified medical assistant, and they can begin making those skills and applying them in real life.
I would just add one thing to it, which is that curriculum we decided to build from scratch because we were finding that soft skills curriculum were so badly divorced from adolescent psychology. And yet the SEL curriculum that we saw were so badly divorced from what employers were saying our kids need to be able to do. And so I hate to say it, but we just got with a couple of organizations like Braven and One Goal that we really respect and just are building it from scratch.
John, a related question on entrepreneurship. Thoughts about introducing that? Most of these trades is about getting a job, but after a couple of years, you can often start a career either in the gig economy or even starting your own plumbing business or your own business as an electrician. Do you see introducing that maybe with a mentor after you get a job, or is that something you want to talk about in high school?
Entrepreneurship?
Yeah.
No, I think it goes back to John's point about we've made some intentional decisions. We're looking at growth sectors and specific occupation types. So we haven't explored entrepreneurship. I do think it's something that could come up in navigation, in a one-on-one relationship with mentors. And a huge part of what we're doing, and we didn't really talk about this much, but it's creating social networks. And the social capital that so many kids from other parts of the country in wealthier communities get access to. And so they may meet someone along the way, and it may spur, that thought and that kind of pivot in career trajectory. And so we certainly would be open to that.
It's really generous of you all to come spend some time with us. We now are at propelamerica.org if you're interested in looking us up. Have a wonderful rest of your conference. Enjoy Common, and thank you for being here.